Today, I'm gonna show you how to take your mix from this to this with just 8 foundational mixing strategies, and we're gonna do this with about 6 stock plugins in 8 minutes. So let's start the clock. Tip number 1, and that is to organize your session from the top down, properly naming the session, labeling all of our tracks, color coding the tracks, and also putting markers in to identify the song structure. So we're gonna take a session that looked like this to this. Loop a section where you see a lot of instruments, click solo, hit play, and then begin labeling what the instrument is. To label a track, we double click on the track name and we identify what instrument it is. Quick bonus tip is if you notice problems in the audio or things you want to remind yourself of later, you can put in a comment. And then we're going to go through the rest of this and label all the tracks accordingly. Now we need a way that our eye can grab on and organize everything neatly, and that is with color coding our tracks. So I'm going to highlight all my drums, then I click on the color, and I like my drums purple. We can go through and put in markers to identify the song structure, which is so incredibly important and often underlooked. Up here in Pro Tools, there's a little plus for the marker. I insert a marker. I'll just call this intro. And I like to align it, if it's not to a click track, the band didn't record to a click, to the first drum hit, and I line that up, and then I move through the song, putting a marker in at each structural change. Little bonus tip, I always like to mark the last note. That way, if I'm doing any sort of fade outs or automation, I can pull down and then I put an end, which is like, this is where the full track's gonna end. Tip number 2, a rough, a ref, and a listen. We want to make sure that we import the rough mix into the song, as that's the framework the artist is using to gauge their expectations. A reference song that allows us and the artist to measure our track in terms of brightness, bass, balance, and beauty to an industry standard song. And last, we're going to listen through, which is the most critical, and formulate a game plan for how we're going to attack this mixing process. For me, being a pen and paper guy, I am going to take a listen through with my notes and formulate a game plan.
Wow, that was fast!
Tip number 3, clean, clean, clean. We're going to go through and we're going to trim up our tips and tails. We're going to strip away any unnecessary audio, and we are also going to go through and insert a low pass and high pass filter on all our tracks to make sure that everything is nice and tidy. Tips and tails. I like to create a group, so I am going to highlight all my drums, and then in Pro Tools, it's going to be Command G, and I'm just going to call it all drums with some Z's. So I'm going to go to here, and this is the tip of my drum track. I'll zoom in, I'll get that nice and tight, and then I'll go to the end of the song, do the same. I will also do this for every other instrument. So when we're talking about stripping out any unnecessary audio, here we could see the singer is clearly taking a break. We can hear her stomping, breathing, and all that's going to be brought up with compression. I like to go through and cut that out and keep moving. So now I'm going to go through, I'm going to do this for the vocals, and I'm also going to do it for the toms. Another great tip, eliminating unnecessary tracks. For example, if your drum overheads were recorded on mono channels, we can now consolidate that to a stereo channel. If we had 4 or 5 microphones on a guitar cab, we can now consolidate that down to 1 track. I created an auxiliary that my 2 drum overheads are sending to, and I am going to control click, commit. I'm going to print that, and then I'm going to just make the mono ones inactive. And now I have 1 fader where I previously had 2. We're going to insert some high pass and low pass filters. I did that by just highlighting all of the tracks and doing a shift option insert stock plugin. So now let's take a look at how to use in EQ's high and low pass filters to clean up some rumble. I have a guitar soloed, and I'm going to pull up the stock EQ, and I'm going to engage the high pass filter. I'm going to begin rolling off, and I'm going to push it too far to the point to where my ear hears it thin out. Roll or scroll until you hear a clear difference, and then from there we back off until we've rolled back enough of the low end without the rumble. So here we go. At this point, clearly too thin, so now we'll dial back to taste. And I'm going to stop right about here. It's not perfect, but the great thing is I can always go back and adjust this more as all the other elements in the mix come together. But doing this for all tracks that have non-essential low end is fantastic because it does open up the low frequencies for the instruments that we need to speak in those areas, like the bass guitar and the kick drum. So let's move through the rest of the tracks and proceed the same way. Tip number 4. Static balance and panning. We have to get moving because there is a lot to cover.
Must go faster.
So the way that we do this on this collection bus that I've named Sum, I put on a VU meter. The way this works, we will, by using our awesome little markers up here, we're going to highlight a section, and I'm going to go back to this screen. All faders are down, and I'm going to hit play, and we're going to bring the bass drums up. And we are going to shoot for somewhere around -3 right here. Now I have 2 kicks. So I'm also going to bring in the bass now, and collectively we are going to shoot for 0. And I'm also going to probably bring in the snare drum pretty quick too. And all 3 combined, we're going to be looking to get somewhere in the 0 area. So you can see that we are kind of between 0 and +2 in the red, which is really not that big of a deal. And we look at the LUFS, we're going to notice we are sitting real pretty.
Cheap shot, king hit, made without warning, distracted, reciprocate.
So we have plenty of room when we want to add in power compression and any sort of limiting and things like that. We have miles to go. This is really, really awesome. For the second part, we are going to use what is considered the pink noise way of creating balance. You can create a track, then use a signal generator, and it pops up. You can click on the pink noise. I want to go instrument by instrument and get it so that the instrument is just peeking out above the pink noise. So I just went through and did the pink noise version, and let's check it out without the snowstorm.
All the damage and what you do is take advantage. All that pain, all that damage, all...
That's pretty cool. Now we're like, 2 dB a little louder, but again, nothing to complain about. With the pink noise, I think there's a little bit more subjectivity than there is with the VU meter, where you're just kind of literally looking at a meter and then moving faders to kind of match the meter. Whether it's the VU meter trick or the pink noise, if you are looking for ways to kind of level up your balancing, those are 2 fantastic ways to kind of get yourself in the pocket. Fear not, my friends. If any of this is going by too fast, don't worry about it. Just drop me a note and I'm happy to make a long format video on anything you need. Tip number 5, and that's setting up routing. We're going to set up a master bus, and we're also going to create some auxiliary sends, which a lot of times become synonymous with parallel processing. So all my instruments, I've set up a submix, which is collecting all the instruments and then feeding into the 2 bus, which is where I put all my processing. The submix allows me to automate. It also allows it to serve as a volume control. Pro tip, put a trim plugin at the top of your submix, and that way if your mix starts to get a little unruly, you can simply just go to here and turn your mix down without having to go back and start turning down individual tracks. I created 4 parallel sends off the drums, 2 for the bass drum, 1 for the snare drum, and 1 for the overall drum set. I created a special guitar effect for the guitar solo, and I created an instrument crush for the entire instrument group. I also created 5 vocal effects, which are your stock short reverb, long reverb, slap delay, medium delay, and long delay. Unsure how to create an auxiliary send in Pro Tools? You can create one right off an individual track. If you go to new track, it'll ask you, and we'll just say EJ's Coolness. Boom. There it is. It appears on the kick drum, and then right next to it is the track, and I can put on any plugins I want, and then this allows me to send as much of that original signal to EJ's Coolness aux track, but this doesn't need any more coolness, so goodbye, EJ.
Bro.
Quick tip number 6, EQ and compression. So if we're thinking about subgroups, our first tip was professional organization. The next tip was the game plan. And then our following tips after that were mainly all based on editing. This is the first one now that dives us into the creative process of mixing. So we learned how to set up our auxiliary sends. Now let's look at the processing that we can put on them. And this is really where your game plan, your notes, your listen from the rough and listen really comes in handy, because we ask ourselves, what do we need overall? Do we need more shine? What do our drums need? Do they need more punch? Do they need more body? How about our vocals? Do they need some parallel compression to help them sit more stable in the mix, or some effects that can allow some great spatial awareness? So for my 2 bus, I created what I like to call the compressor sandwich.
I hope you're hungry.
The compressor sandwich starts with an EQ that controls the frequencies going into my compressor. Then I built a 33609 style compressor, which has a very soft knee, medium attack and release, and a low ratio. From there, we have a sweetener EQ that's coming out to kind kind of help lift the sound. This lo-fi right here is what I use to model analog, where I'm using the saturation knob to push a little saturation into the compressor the same way analog circuitry would do. Let's take a listen to the 2-bus before and after the processing that's on.
I know your ass is wasted. I know your ass is wasted. I know.
So while we lost a little bit of level, you could hear the low mids tightening up, you can hear the top end lift, and you could really kind of hear more clarity in the mid range. Next, we have our instrument crush, same concept. This one I decided to model in 1176. So we are a fast attack, fast release. Let's listen before and pay attention to the guitars and listen to how they step forward.
I know your ass is wasted.
Moving on, our drums. If you look at my comments, on the kick, I wanted to have a parallel that adds some punch. For punch, we are going for a slow attack and a fast release. I also wanted a one that models the level lock, which is to basically just destroy the kick drum. For the crush, it is a fast attack, a fast release, and also on this lo-fi, we are bringing this down to 16 bits and adding a ton of saturation to make it really gnarly snare. Looking for some punch. For same kind of concept as the bass drum, a slow attack, a fast release to allow that transient to come through. The whole drum set feeds into this crush, which is an 1176 style. A relatively fast attack, a relatively fast release, and a pretty typical ratio. Let's hear what this sounds like with and without the drum parallels added in.
I know your ass is wasted. I know your ass is wasted.
The cymbals come to life. The drum set's pumping a little bit. The kick is cutting through because we're adding a lot more beater attack to it, and we're hearing that snare kind of now knife through the mix. That is the beauty of parallel compression. If you want any more information on some of these parallels or what we're doing here, drop a note in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to make an extended version. So let's look at the vocal processing. Some basic sends that we set up. One was a parallel processing crush. So we went with 1176 style, where it's a very aggressive ratio, super fast attack and release, so that it's very spitty. We made our analog kind of gritty up to 0.5 there, and we are adding some 2.3-ish, about 4 dBs to make it very aggressive. From there, it's just some basic flavors, and you can honestly go to your own DAW and load up a reverb and put a preset in for short, for long, for slap, and then do the same for your delays, a medium delay and a long delay. The only thing that I do is I create sandwiches again. So we're EQing going into all these. It's the same. It's kind of like the Abbey Road style, where it's almost like a phone filter going in, because I just want the mid-range, and then I leave the output from the effect units a little wider, and I may go in and tweak those depending on the mix if we need more lift or we want to roll off a little bit of spittiness from a delay or something. Think of these as kind of like tone knobs and ways to create interesting moments with your vocal.
I know your ass is wasted.
One more time, what we're going to notice is that the vocal steps forward.
I know your ass is wasted. I know your ass is wasted.
Okay, we now can go instrument by instrument to add any EQ or compression we feel is still lacking. It should be very minimal at this point because all the changes we made really on a global basis changed the character of this mix dramatically. Let's check all this against the rough mix. Here's the rough first.
I know your ass is wasted.
Now where we're at.
I know your ass is wasted.
Tip number 7, automation. The most important thing that I want to convey about automation is it adds life to your mix. It is a great way to inject extra energy for really no additional work or no additional thought. What I did was I started with my submix. I have a left pan and a right pan. You can see that they're mirrored. And I went through, and in different sections of songs where our markers come in handy, I pulled down areas where I want the song to feel tight, which then when we hit the hooks and we have full pan, it allows it to feel bigger. The next thing I did, staying with my submix, because I'm feeding that into the 2-bus, I did a volume automation. Brought the song's overall volume up in the choruses, pulled them back a little bit in the verses to, again, create kind of emotional crests where I need. And here's the pro tip. I added a EQ on the submix, which is just a little bit of a top end boost from 2K up, and I automate that on and off to hit in the choruses to add just a little bit more high end lift and excitement to make those choruses feel a little bit larger than life. Okay, tip number 8. Always print into your mix. I don't even need to demonstrate this, but we will.
Cannot express how important it is to print into your mix. Reason is it makes your revision process when artists come back with notes so much easier. It makes comparing your reference a ton. I can drag the reference over this and toggle between the green input, which is me hearing everything that is active in the mix, or removing the green input and now hearing the rough and being able to literally A/B them in real time. And when you're doing mixes and you're on revision 3 or 4 and somebody's asking to turn the snare drum up a dB, being able to quickly toggle between and hear if you're making that difference, it's such a game changer.
So let's not lose sight of the overall philosophy of today's 8 tips. Our first 2 tips are organization of the session and organization of the mind. Our next 3 tips are editing, which keeps us in our editing frame of mind the entire time. And then our last 3, well, they're all about the creative decisions that you and I make to make these mixes come to life. All right, have fun mixing, and I'll see you next time.